Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our information session on the Community Accelerator Grant Program, a grant program funded by the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation and intended to provide essential capital for Washington State's arts and cultural organizations. My name is Tom Vasquez, and I'm the Vice President of Grant Making at Arts Fund. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a light-skinned Latino man with salt and pepper hair and a goatee. I'm wearing a blue shirt and wire-rimmed glasses, and I'm sitting in my office with books and personal items behind me. As we begin today's workshop, I'd like to acknowledge that the city of Seattle, where Arts Fund is based, is on the occupied lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the ancestral land of the Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribes, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I want to also acknowledge those of you who have joined us today from different territories. Land acknowledgements are only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. I hope you'll take the time to learn about the Indigenous people in your region and support them. In order to make today's event more accessible to those of all abilities, we've added a number of accessibility features. We're joined by an ASL interpreter. You can enable automatically generated captions by clicking on the closed caption live transcript button in the meeting control bar, and then clicking enable auto transcription. You can click and drag the provided subtitles to move their position on the screen. You can also click the small arrow to the right of the live transcript button to adjust your subtitle settings or to open the full transcript at any time. Please be aware the subtitles are automatically generated and will not be 100% accurate. After the webinar, we'll be sharing on our website a recording of this webinar that has been captioned professionally. We've also asked our speakers to visually describe themselves the first time they speak, as I did at the top of the program, and to identify themselves by name when speaking. In a few moments, you'll be hearing from Michael Greer, the President and CEO of Arts Fund, to provide an overview of the Community Accelerated Grant Program. Today's webinar is intended to provide clarity around eligibility for the program and details about the application process. We'll guide you through the application, and you'll have a chance to see the application in the grants portal that you'll be using to submit your own applications. We'll provide a period at the end for questions, and we want to encourage you to submit questions during the webinar by using the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be responding to some of those questions in the Q&A section as well. This webinar will be posted and recorded and posted to the Arts Fund website in the coming days, so you can continue to use it as a resource. And now I'm going to introduce the CEO and President of Arts Fund, Michael Greer. Michael.
Thank you, Tom, and hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Michael Greer, and I am the President and CEO of Arts Fund. For those of you whose experience would benefit from a visual description, I am a light-skinned Black male with no hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a mustache, and wearing a blue turtleneck and sitting in front of a window to my garden. Arts Fund is excited to be able to administer our Community Accelerator Grant. In partnership with the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, we will be distributing $10 million to arts and cultural organizations across the state of Washington. We know that many of you are facing some of your toughest years as an arts nonprofit. We also know that there is still incredible uncertainty for everyone in this sector about what the next few years will look like in terms of audiences, donors, and public sector support. Despite the uncertainty and despite the difficulties, we have seen so many of you innovate and reinvent your organizations and your programming to not only adapt to this new world, but position yourselves to thrive. The goal of this program is to help you achieve that. These are unrestricted funds designed to allow all of you to accelerate whatever it is that is helping you thrive. Whether it is payroll, programming, facilities, or something else, the program understands that ultimately you know best how to meet your community's needs, and we want to support those efforts, whatever they are. In addition, we understand that in order for you to thrive, we must provide equitable access to all of our services. Access to the arts and culture provide innumerable benefits to our communities, and ensuring that organizations have equitable access to the funding necessary to do this work is critical. This program will focus on equitable distribution to communities that have been historically underrepresented in philanthropy, including Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, and rural communities. We know the impact that all of you have in your communities, and we know how important it is to support that work. Arts Fund's mission to support the arts through leadership, advocacy, and grant making is embodied in this work. And through you, we work to inspire a healthy, equitable, and creative Washington. Thank you for your participation. And with that, I would like to also direct everyone's attention to the chat box. We have inserted a link to a very short demographic survey so that we can understand who is in the room today. This is optional, but we are encouraging all of you to take 1 minute to fill out this form so that Arts Fund can understand how we are doing in our outreach and where we need to do better in the future. With that, we are going to give everyone 1 minute to fill out the survey, and then we will send it back over to Tom to continue the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about eligibility for this program. The Community Accelerator Grant is intended to benefit arts and cultural organizations in Washington State. We want to be able to support a wide variety of groups across the state, but we also want to make it easy for organizations to understand whether or not this grant program is intended for them. In order to be eligible, groups must meet these 4 requirements. First, groups must be located in Washington State. Groups must meet one of these 3 conditions. They either must have 501c3 status, they must be fiscally sponsored by a 501c3 organization, or be a tribal organization. We've included tribal organizations here because they're not required to have 501c3 status from the federal government. Groups must have an annual average budget of $25,000 for the past 3 years. Again, this is an average. Your budget does not have to exceed $25,000 for each of those 3 years, as long as the average is above $25,000. And finally, for fiscally sponsored organizations, I want to point out that we're asking for the organization's own budget to average $25,000 or above, not the fiscal sponsor. And finally, groups must have as their primary focus producing or supporting arts and cultural activities. Now, I want to take a moment here to highlight some details that are included in our FAQ document as well. First, I want to help explain what we mean when we say cultural organizations are eligible. In order to be eligible, a cultural organization's work must contain a significant artistic element. The best way to illustrate this is with an example. So let's imagine 2 hypothetical organizations. Let's imagine the first group uplifts Mexican American and Latinx culture in Eastern Washington. The way they do this is by providing workshops, seminars, and presentations in schools about Latinx identity and history. So this is a cultural organization, yes, but the work does not contain a significant artistic element, so they would not be eligible. Now let's say there's a second organization that also uplifts Latinx and Mexican American culture, also in Eastern Washington. But the way they do their work is through participation in festivals using traditional dance, music, and costuming to celebrate the history of their people. Because they have a significant artistic element to their work, this organization would be eligible. I'll talk about what I mean by primary mission. There are a number of groups in our state that have programs that use art-related activities and cultural activities in their work, but that is not their primary mission. These groups would not be eligible. What we're looking for is the organizations whose primary work is producing or supporting arts and cultural activities. Groups must be based in Washington state. We know there are a number of organizations that sit on state borders in Idaho and Oregon that may serve a large number of Washingtonians. While we appreciate that work, this program is intended only for groups based within Washington state. We wanted to address the question of Arts Fund grantees. Arts Fund grantees are welcome to apply if they meet the requirements of this program, but they're not automatically considered eligible simply because they've received a grant from Arts Fund, nor are they automatically guaranteed a grant if they apply. Status as a current or former Arts Fund grantee will have no impact on how likely your organization is to receive funding. This is also true for organizations who applied to last year's Nonprofit Community Recovery Grants. The Nonprofit Community Recovery Grant Program, or NCR for short, was a separate program that Arts Fund administered last year with funding from the Department of Commerce. Because the eligibility is different for this program, groups are not guaranteed to be eligible simply because they qualified for the NCR program last year. We want to encourage you to look at the eligibility requirements for this grant program and make sure that you're eligible here. If you still have questions about whether or not your group is eligible, there are a number of ways you can get more information. Ask us here during the webinar. We'll try to get through a number of your questions in the Q&A section. You can look at the FAQ document available on our website at artsfund.org/accelerator. And if you have specific questions, please email us at accelerator@artsfund.org, and we'll be able to help out. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Ellen Milligan, the Senior Grants Manager at Arts Fund, who will be presenting our application and the application portal. Ellen?
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ellen Milligan. I use she, her pronouns, and as Tom mentioned, I am Arts Fund's Senior Grants Manager. For a visual description, I am a white woman with long dark hair wearing a tan sweater, and I'm in my home office / dining room in front of a bookcase and a painting of a tree. Before I share my screen, I want to emphasize that what I'm about to walk through is a preview of the Accelerator grant application. The grants portal is not going to open until January 4th at noon, at which time we will send out an email and we will post a link at artsfund.org/accelerator. In the meantime, we have shared a PDF of all the questions on our website, so you can preview those, but you will not be able to create a profile or start an application until we open the portal on January 4th. That said, I'm excited to bring up my screen here and give you a little sneak peek of what it's going to look like when you're able to access this on January 4th. So when you come to this login page, you will have an opportunity to log in. If you have already applied for a grant through Arts Fund before, you can use your existing credentials. If not, you can follow the prompt below where it says sign up. So I'm going to log in using my existing account. And when this comes up, you will see a home page that includes some text up top about the fund and some further instructions below about how to apply. The first step you're going to want to take when you reach this page is create an eligibility to get started. This form will allow you to find out if you meet the minimum eligibility requirements. If you answer no to any of the questions in this document, you will see a message displayed that tells you you are ineligible. So I will put in my organization, say I'm a dance company, and I will create my profile. The next question will be, is your organization based in Washington State? In my case, yes. The next question asks about those eligibility requirements that Tom covered. Does your organization meet one of the criteria below? Is it a 501c3? Is it fiscally sponsored or a tribal organization? If one of those things applies, you click yes. Then we have our minimum budget question. Over the last 3 years, does your organization have an average annual budget greater than $25,000? Yes. In my case, I'm a dance company, so I would say my primary focus is producing or supporting arts. But if I were to click no, I would see this text here that says, thank you for your interest, you're not eligible. So in the event that you are completing this form and you don't meet an eligibility requirement, you are done here. You can just leave the portal. Unfortunately, you will not be able to apply for funding. If you do meet all the eligibility requirements, however, there will be a box here where you have the option to add more context for the Arts Fund team if you like. I want to emphasize that this box here that allows you to describe how your organization meets the criteria is optional. We certainly don't expect everyone to use this, but it is here if you think there might be some questions or confusion. Again, you can always reach out to us directly at Accelerator at Arts Fund if you're not sure. But once you've answered these 4 questions, you can then create your profile. So assuming I've been able to answer yes, I can click the blue Create Profile button. And this will take me back to the home page, and then I can start my application. So you'll scroll down here and see this tag that says plus Get Started. So I will click on this, and this takes you to your application process. So there are 3 forms that are part of the application. You can complete these in any order. You can save your work as you go and come back. You don't need to complete it in one sitting. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to start with the general contact information form. So you click the blue Open button, and it will automatically populate the name of your organization. I think a lot of this form is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just cover a couple of things. One important item is that this first question asks you to select the statement that applies to your organization. So if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, and you click My organization is fiscally sponsored, this will populate in some additional questions below which are required. So fiscally sponsored organizations will need to provide the name of their fiscal sponsor here, the EIN, employer identification number of their fiscal sponsor, and they'll need to upload their fiscal sponsorship agreement in PDF format. If you're a tribal organization and select that above, you will need to upload your organization's resolution or charter in PDF format. But let's say I'm a 501c3, so I'll switch it back to that. We do have a field here for EIN, employer identification number, which is required. If you're a 501c3, you should have one, but not all organizations will. So if you do not have an EIN, please note it's a required field, so you'll just need to type NA. The rest of these are pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just mention a couple more down here. Website is a required field, but if your organization does not have a website, type NA. Same for mission statement. Down here we have contact information. Primary contact is the primary person that you want Arts Fund staff to contact with any questions or follow-ups about the application. So in most cases, this will be the contact information of the person filling out the application. We also have space for a secondary contact. The final element I want to cover on this form is the focus area. So this is really important because this helps us understand how your organization fits into the arts and culture sector. So there's a drop-down menu here that allows you to select your organization's primary focus area. I want to give a little bit more detail on a couple of these. We have an option for arts service. What we mean by this is an organization whose primary mission is to support other arts organizations or artists. So for example, if your primary activity is providing trainings to arts organizations, you would be considered arts service. I know this can be a bit confusing because all arts organizations provide services to their audience. So just want to be really clear that this is for organizations that don't primarily produce art, they support the arts sector. There's also an option for other. So if you feel that your primary focus area is not covered by any of these options, but you do meet the requirement of being an arts and cultural organization, you can select other. And then that will populate a text box where we give you 25 words to describe what that general focus area is. You'll also see that there is an option to put a secondary focus area. We only require a primary, but you can put a second one if that applies to your organization. So now that I've gone through this form, I'm going to click Save Draft to save my work. I cannot use the Mark Complete button because I haven't completed all my fields, but once you have marked all the required fields, which are indicated by a red star, you could mark this form complete just so you know that it's done. But since mine isn't complete, I'm going to use Close. This takes us to the second of 3 forms. So I'm going to walk through the financial information form a little bit. So we ask you to upload your organization's most recent Form 990, 990EZ, or 990N. So this is mostly for 501c3s. If you do not have a 990, you're not required to file one with the IRS. You can upload your most recent financial documents instead. So we add a little bit more detail on what we mean by that. That should include an income statement, a balance sheet, and a statement of cash flow if available. This does need to be in PDF format. So you can click select a file, upload your document. The next question here asks you to select what type of document you uploaded. So you can select if it's a 990, which year it came from. If they're financial documents, you can also select which year you uploaded. Below this, we ask you to give us your operating expenses and your revenue data in this format for fiscal year 2021, fiscal year 2022, and fiscal year 2023 budgeted, because obviously fiscal year 2023 will be ongoing when this application is open. We have some details here about what we mean by each of these buckets. One I do want to mention is personnel expenses. If your organization has paid staff, this would apply to you. Personnel expenses will be a part of your operating expenses, but we ask for this line item separately for data and advocacy reasons. If your organization does not have paid staff, that's totally fine. That will not impact your award in any way, but you can enter 0 here. I do see some folks are raising hands and submitting questions. I just want to emphasize that after I get through this preview of the application, we will have time for Q&A, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. Below this financial data, we have a drop down where you're allowed to tell us how much funding you're requesting. The range is from $2,500 to $25,000. We have these bucketed out into amounts of $2,500, so you can select the range that your organization is requesting. This is general operating support, and it's totally at the discretion of your organization how much funding you'd like to request. We really defer to you on what would most help you execute on your mission. Below that, we ask for a little bit more information about what the funding would help cover. This will not impact your award in any way. Again, this is really just data that we're collecting for advocacy purposes. So, and also to get a sense of the impact that the fund might have. So we ask you to rank a few pre-selected buckets of work and let us know which ones you think you will spend the funding on. So the options are salaries and labor, programming, rents, mortgage, facility upgrades, personal protective equipment and COVID preparedness, communications marketing, and other. We do encourage you to use that other bucket if you think that your primary use of this fund is not covered here. So we ask you to rank these 1 through 6 if you use other, and you can select the ranking by clicking on the drop down. Below this, we have a couple more questions. Again, this is just to help us understand the impact of the fund. So we ask, how would this funding help your organization's ability to attract other funding? You can rank this 1 through 5, 1 being not at all, 5 being extremely helpful. So this is trying to understand if this funding might have an added impact outside of the dollars. Below that, we ask you to quantify a little bit. This does not need to be perfect. Again, this is really just to give us a sense of the impact of the award. We ask, by how much do you expect receiving this grant, if awarded, would improve your revenue? In other words, how much additional funding, not including the amount of this grant, do you believe you will be able to raise? So again, that is a number. So now I will click Save Draft. I will close. And I will go to our final form here. So this is our demographics form. Thank you all for bearing with me. When we pull this up, you will see a few statements that you can rank. So we have 3 statements here that help us understand how your organization centers programming for certain communities. As Michael and Tom mentioned, our hope is to make sure that these grant funds are equitably distributed across Washington State's arts and culture sector, particularly for those organizations who center the voices of people who identify as BIPOC, LGBTQ+, or people as disabilities, and people who live in rural communities. So we ask you to rank these statements 1 through 5. This is a self-assessment. We ask you to be candid here and determine whether you strongly disagree or strongly agree with these statements. our organization creates and/or provides programming centering LGBTQ+ communities. We ask the same question for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and people with disabilities. We really leave it to you as the experts in your work to determine if you believe that your organization centers these populations. And this is very helpful for us in understanding how the impact of the fund can be distributed. Below that, we ask for some demographic information. So this is for board and staff. There is some detailed instructions here, and we also have some more information in our FAQ. All of these fields are required, so we ask for demographic data of the prior year and the current year. If you do not have data for your board or your staff, you can mark everything as do not know, prefer not to answer, or not applicable here below. This also works if you do not have a board or a staff. However, I will say that this data is very important. We will be using this information again to ensure that it is distributed equitably. So if you have this data, please enter it. It is very critical, and we will be looking at this when we're looking at distribution. There's also some information in the FAQ for organizations that don't have board and staff. We understand that that's not the situation of every organization. So for example, if you're a fiscally sponsored organization and you have an advisory group, please put the data for that in board. If you're an organization that does not have a paid staff but has a robust volunteer slate, you can put information for volunteers with significant responsibilities in your staff columns. Again, there's full data on that in the FAQ, and we understand that this doesn't always apply to all organizations the same. So we want you to be able to use this in the way that makes the most sense to reflect the leadership of your organization. We ask for this information for race, for LGBTQ+, and for people with disabilities. So once you have finished filling out this form, you would mark it as complete, but I won't because I didn't finish it. So I'll click Save Draft, and then I will close. And this will take me back to my application page. Once you have successfully filled out all these forms, the Submit button will turn green. You'll have the opportunity to click Submit and send your application off. Once you have submitted, the application is no longer editable. So if you need to make changes, you can contact us directly at accelerator@artsfund.org and let us know if you need to make changes. But we do encourage you to wait until everything is completely ready before you click Submit. All right, I will now stop my share. And I'll invite Michael and Tom back onto screen with me so we can take a little bit of time to answer some questions. I know I saw a lot coming in while I was speaking. So thank you all for that. Welcome back, Michael and Tom. So to kick us off, I want to ask a question that I think probably a lot of groups have, which is, sorry, let me pull up my document here. Got too many things open. Will I have to report that the funding was used in the way reported in the application? Will my organization be penalized if we use funding for a different area?
I can answer that question. There will be no reporting required for this grant. These grants are unrestricted, and the recipient organization should use the grant dollars as they see fit.
Thanks, Tom. In that vein about what funds can be used on, I think some folks might have a question. Are there any restrictions on what funds can be spent on?
Thanks, Ellen. This is Michael Greer. These funds are restricted, but they are unrestricted, forgive me, but they are not eligible for personal expenses. So for example, like home mortgages, personal utilities, they are unrestricted for organizational and business expenses.
Great, thank you. How about award amounts? So there is a wide range between $2,500 and $25,000 for the award. How will you determine who gets how much?
Well, in the application, we really want this to be the decision of the organizations. Organizations are free to ask for any amount of funding. We recommend organizations ask for the amount of funding that will boost your organization's ability to invest in your mission and your essential role serving your community.
Thanks, Tom. Here's another one. Let's see. When will funding decisions be made?
Thanks, Ellen. Michael Greer again. Organizations will be notified and the funds will be distributed in March of 2023.
Great, thank you. How about language? Can applications be submitted in a language other than English?
So as a two-part answer to that, we are not able to accept applications in languages other than English. We will be translating the application and other materials into several languages, specifically Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. We'll be translating the application and other materials into those languages and making those available on our website and in the grants portal. This application is primarily quantitative. In other words, we have multiple choice questions and we're asking organizations to provide numbers. We're hopeful that this does not create unreasonable burdens for those for whom English is not their first language. There are no narrative questions that will be scored. So we're hopeful that eliminates one form of bias against people who don't speak English fluently.
Great, thank you for that, Tom. Here's an eligibility question. So does the 3-year budget average requirement need to include COVID years for which many groups had reduced budgets?
Let me take that one. This grant does require an average budget of $25,000 over the past 3 years. And when we thought about that, we realized the challenges faced by many nonprofits, particularly arts and cultural groups, during the past 2 years during the pandemic. The reason we asked for an average rather than an absolute amount of $25,000 for each of those 3 years is we realized many organizations lost revenue during the pandemic may have fallen below that level for a year or two. We're hopeful that by using an average number, more organizations that had temporary setbacks in their revenue will still be eligible for this grant.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So many good questions coming in. Here's a question. What if I am not a 501c3, but I have cultural activities as a primary focus?
I'm happy to take that one. The eligibility requirements do require that you are a 501c3 or a tribally recognized organization. So we are not able to grant to for-profit organizations.
Thanks. And I'll just add to that, Michael, we also, if you're fiscally sponsored by a 501c3, you are eligible. Great. Let's see. We are getting lots of questions about budget. So can you clarify, is the budget requirement an average of 25,000 and over?
Yes, 25,000 is the minimum. So any amount over 25,000 would qualify for it.
And this is over 3 years.
That's correct.
What if an organization is newer than 3 years old? Are they eligible to apply?
That's
Hi,
a great.
this is Michael again. Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead,
Tom. They are not. We're looking for organizations with 3 years history of either 501c3 status, fiscally sponsorship, or tribal representation.
Thank you. Yeah, we did not maybe explicitly say that, but we do require 3 years of data. So if your organization is newer than 3 years, you are not eligible for this grant. Let's see. I know we're getting a lot of questions about fiscal year.
Ellen?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Michael. I just wanted to chime in on one question that we wanted to be clear about that had come to us, and that was how were we going to decide the money that goes to the whole state, like, and how we were doing that, because I think that's an important question to talk about. But our community advisory panel, which we have that is guiding us in, that has been guiding us in design and will be guiding us in terms of distribution, does represent all corners of Washington State. Arts Fund is based in Seattle, but the community advisory panel is representative of the entire state. So we have been intentional in our outreach to invite groups from across the state, and geography will be a factor in award distribution with consideration given to groups that are in rural communities. So we're prepared to fund groups in every county in Washington State. So please, if you're from an area outside of Greater Puget Sound, we want you to apply. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Thanks, Michael. On that note, I see we had a question about, is there a section for do you center rural populations on the application? I know we don't ask that question, so do you want to talk a little bit about how we're going to look at statewide representation and prioritizing rural populations?
That rural populations will be centered in the scoring and the conversations, and we do encourage them to apply.
Yes, thank you. And because we will know where you're based, that will help us ensure that we're getting representation across the state. Let's see, someone said, are capital expenses allowed with these funds?
Yes, they're unrestricted funding, so there's no restriction on that.
Thank you. I see we have a lot of questions about what do you mean by centered, and the questions where we ask, do you center certain groups? Do either of you want to talk a little bit more about that and what we mean? I think we really leave it up to the organizations.
This is Michael Greer. I'm happy to share that. Yes, we look to organizations to kind of define what centering means for them, but what we're trying to get at is organizations that prioritize these populations in their work, whether they're Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, or rural communities. So we're looking for organizations who are actively trying to uplift those communities in either their internal work or their external programming.
Great, thanks. Someone asked, is there a matching requirement?
There is no matching requirement for this grant. However, we are interested in learning how organizations are able to use this money in order to leverage more funding. So that's something that we have a question about in the application, and we're interested in learning the impact on these funds with organizations in the state.
Thank you. I see a couple people asking, am I mistaken that there are no narrative sections of this application?
There are a couple of brief narrative questions where people are able to add more context, but there is no narrative question to this application that will be scored. So we're asking narrative purely to add more information to the application, but none of the narrative will be included in the scoring process for your application.
Thanks, Tom. And I would add, none of the narrative questions are required. They are only there if you feel that you need to give a little bit of context about your organization's situation, and it is not scored. Tom, I think this question would be good for you. Could you please repeat the example of cultural organizations and the significant artistic component eligibility?
Sure, I'm happy to. When I was talking, I used a hypothetical example of two organizations based in Eastern Washington, and I'll share that again. So imagine two hypothetical organizations. The first group uplifts Mexican American culture in Eastern Washington, and the way they do this work is by providing workshops, seminars, and presentations in schools about Latinx identity and history. This is considered a cultural organization, but because they don't contain a significant artistic element in their work, they would not be eligible. On the other hand, imagining a second organization that similarly uplifts Latinx and Mexican American culture in Eastern Washington, but the way they deliver this work is through participating in festivals, using traditional dance, music, and costuming to celebrate the history of their people. Because their work contains a significant artistic element, this organization would be eligible.
Thank you, Tom. We got another question. Is this an all or nothing application? So if an org requests $25,000 at the maximum, is there a potential that they could be funded for less?
Yes, it's a short answer to that.
Thanks, Michael. We are almost out of time for our Q&A. So I have one or two more I wanted to hit, but Michael or Tom, did you see any coming in that you wanted to make sure we cover?
There are a couple of technical questions that I wanted to address real quickly while we're here. There was one question, is the eligibility check required prior to applying for the grant? We wanted to share eligibility requirements now so organizations could see for themselves whether or not they believe they're eligible. In the application process in itself, we'll ask those first 4 questions at the beginning of the application process. And if organizations answer no to any of those questions, then the application will stop. They won't be able to move forward.
Thanks, Tom.
There was another question I saw. An organization asked if they would be able to create a login before January 4th, so then they could go back and just log in and begin their application.
So is that a question for me?
I'm looking to you. I'm fairly certain that the answer is no.
Correct. So yeah, the application link is not available until January 4th. So at that time, you'll be able to create a login or access the application using your existing login if you've applied for a grant through the Arts Fund system before. But there is no way to access the application before January 4th. To reiterate, we do have a PDF of the application available on the website that you can take a look at if you want to start preparing and looking at what we're going to ask you to answer. Also, I know I mentioned groups that have applied for a grant before may already have a login. Just to reiterate on that point, even if a group has received a grant from Arts Fund before, there's no preferential treatment. They still must meet the minimum eligibility requirements, and we'll be assessing all applications independent of affiliation with Arts Fund or previous grants. Michael or Tom, any other final questions before we close this section out?
I'd just like to reiterate the fact that we will be accepting questions and fielding communications throughout this entire process. So please reach out to us via email, and that will be put in the chat as well. And we intend to to be facilitating questions throughout this process. This is not the only time that we're going to be doing that. So if your question wasn't answered today, please reach out to us, and we'll make sure that we get back to as many as possible before the application opens and throughout the process.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both Michael and Tom. I think with that, we will wrap up our Q&A. Thank you so much for submitting all those questions. Again, if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us directly. And I'll pass it over to you, Michael, to close us out.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you, everybody. It is inspiring to hear these questions and the level of enthusiasm for this program. If you feel like you meet these eligibility requirements, please apply. We want this funding to reach as broadly as possible, but we can only do that if you apply. That's very important. We know that this one program is not enough to support all that you need going into the future, but please remember that Arts Fund and the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, we acknowledge what you bring to this state and all that you do to create a better quality of life for Washingtonians. That is what this program represents. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for what you do and what you're bringing to the community. Thank you and have a great day. And please apply to the program.